hope some of you enjoyed a nice walk over in the non-snowy weather that we encountered yesterday. So I'll just give you a heads up. So this is Dean's Forum. And so about a year ago, maybe mid-year last year, I sat down with the dean and she said, you know, I really, really wish that we could do something to help our faculty to better understand how to react to learner feedback. Being the caring dean that she is, she said, you know, I think it's really distressing a lot of times for our faculty who put a ton of effort into creating something, teaching, lecture, bedside teaching, whatever. They put all this effort in and then they receive less than glowing feedback. Okay? So oftentimes they will want to totally reinvent their curriculum or throw in the towel altogether, neither of which is great. So how do we address this? What can we do to help them to better recognize what they can do to effectively react to these responses? So I immediately thought of a colleague at Virginia Tech, Kim Filer, and I contacted Kim and I said, Kim, I know you do assessment, I know you work with faculty development all the time, can you help us? She said, absolutely. I also have another colleague that's a member of my team, Danielle Lust, that can help. We can pull something together and bring it to you. And so here we are. So it is my pleasure to introduce them both to you today. Dr. Kim Filer is the Assistant Provost for Teaching and Learning and the Director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, formerly known as CIDER, you all may recognize it as CIDER, at Virginia Tech. Dr. Filer earned her bachelor's in elementary education at the University of Maryland, her master's degree in education at Johns Hopkins, her PhD in educational research and evaluation at Virginia Tech. Dr. Filer has over 20 years of experience in the field of education, developing curriculum and teaching at the secondary, undergraduate, and graduate levels. And she really lives, breathes, eats assessment at all of these levels. So she's the perfect one to lead this session on responding to, interpreting and responding to learner feedback. And joining Dr. Filer is Dr. Danielle Lust, who is the Associate Director for the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning at Virginia Tech. Dr. Lust earned her bachelor's in English education from Bluefield College, her doctorate in educational psychology from Virginia Tech. She supports faculty development initiatives at the university, working directly with faculty to improve their teaching practices. And her background is in curriculum and instruction with a specialization in educational psychology. And she has over 12 years experience in higher education curriculum, faculty development, and student learning support. So together, they bring us this wonderful session. Please join me in welcoming Dr.
Well, thank you. We have some slides to organize our talks, but first of all, if you haven't had a chance to get food, please do that. And also at any time, if you need to get up and get a drink, please feel free to do that as well. So just a little information. So Sherry talked to me and said, you know, we really need to come talk about course evals, how to respond to that feedback. And she gave me an overarching summary of your feedback. It's more at an aggregate institution level. And I said, now, why do you want me to come? These are really high. What am I going to talk about? So the reason I point that out is it's often hard to get the individual feedback, but as an outside person coming in that sees lots of data about student feedback, which is sometimes good and sometimes bad, but overall, your scores are really high. So I say that because as much as sometimes it's still hard to get our own, I actually first said I'm not really sure why I was supposed to be here because the teaching evaluations are some of the highest we've seen. So I just wanted to point that out. This isn't a deficit model. I wasn't sort of called here because there's a problem. This is more about how can you take feedback, and then how do you take feedback in context with everything else. So part of what we're going to talk about is I'll talk a little bit about feedback, the overall questions, but then Danielle's going to talk about specifically the questions that your feedback instrument asks if you see a spot that you want to work on, or a certain question that you want to work on. She's going to give you a few strategies that research says should help in that area. Now, we only have an hour with you, so we're not going to get into all the sorts of strategies. It's really an overview. We're going to probably be a bit of a mile wide, inch deep. And we'll leave you probably wanting more information. So know that you can also reach out to us. One nice thing now, you're going to be with us. We're all under the tech umbrella. And so we can start doing some more collaborations. And just a little plug. So I know many of you actually go to our annual conference each year. But in addition to that, I think next year we're going to start streaming and WebExing a lot of our workshops that are more in-depth, and so that both Northern Virginia and Roanoke can see that. Now, I know your time is very different. You're on a different sort of teaching timetable, but you are welcome to join us for those. The other piece to know is that Danielle's going to probably take 3 minutes to talk about a strategy, and then another 5 minutes talking about another strategy, and we often spend hours on just one of those strategies with faculty. So just a little caveat, but know that you can stop us at any time and ask questions, ask for clarification. We will have time for questions, but please, this is a session for you. So if you have a question or we say something and you're like, what is that? Or no, I tried that and that doesn't work. Feel free to stop us and we'll talk about that and talk through it. Okay. All right, so this is just about what do you do? How do you inform your teaching? Because student feedback is one piece of information that we use. Okay. So today what we're going to talk about is what can we actually learn from student evaluations? Because sometimes you don't learn so much. Sometimes you learn that you're pretty upset at the end and you're like, gosh, I put so much effort in and this is what they thought I was supposed to do. But then on the other side, sometimes student evaluations aren't so helpful and they're like, it's great, awesome. Yeah. And that's not so helpful either. So we're going to talk about what you can learn and what you can't learn. Then we're also going to talk about, well, based on what the feedback that you do receive from students, what does that mean? What can you actually do about it if you want to do something about it? And then what can you really do to build on that knowledge of teaching and learning? All right, so this is a quick kickoff activity. I know we're eating, so this worked a little better than the other session, so I'm going to ask you to put your forks down. We're going to have to walk around. So you'll see some numbers on the wall. You just have to get close to the numbers. There's more of us. You just have to sort of gravitate to that general area. So here's what this is. It's called 4 quarters. So we know that a lot of what you have to do is really content heavy with students. And you have to give up time to do activities. And you're thinking, I can't give up a whole half hour to do an activity. So this is a quick one. It's a quick one that students move, but what it does for you as an instructor is you got to get to see where everyone is. You can do this to ask students, where did you have the most challenge? That sort of thing. And you just get a rough idea, and you'll see when we do this. So I actually ask questions that would tell me about you. Because we don't have enough time for me to go around and actually learn something about you, that would take the whole hour. This way I can kind of get a sense for who I'm talking to. So what's going to happen is I'm going to ask you a question, and you're going to have to pick, it's multiple choice, you're going to have to pick which answer is the best representation of your belief, your thought, who you are, and you go there. These are not mutually exclusive, you have to pick the best one. Okay, and you'll see, they start easier, go harder. So here we go. Most of my students are. So, whatever your answer is, you kind of go sort of near that number. Do we have people on WebEx? If you're on WebEx, this is more multiple choice. Pick the one in your brain, the number that most corresponds with your students. And you're a 1. So we have more ones. So I'm going to stop because what's really interesting, I'll just give you a little insight as an instructor. At 7 o'clock, we had more 2s, less 1s. So it actually tells you sort of your general population. So we mostly 1s and 2s. 3s, no something else. You're something else. All right, very helpful. I am here to jump right into a change in student learning, make a few tweaks to my course, learn more about how to make changes in student learning, watch and listen to discussions of change. 4, you're going to watch and listen. early adopters are those people that we love. They just come in and say, we'll try it. What would you like us to try? I'll try it. So, not so many early adopters. We have a few people that are ready to make tweaks. We have an academic crowd. I want to learn, I want to process, I want to read, and then I might learn. So that's why I'm here. And then I am going to watch and listen, and then think about it. So this helps us. It actually understands how quickly you actually are willing to say, I'm ready, versus learning. So, all right, next. I believe, so it's your belief, I believe the biggest driver of change in teaching is the student population, student outcomes data, that can be both either learning data or job-related, professional-related data, current research on teaching and learning, or use of technology. Now, again, these aren't mutually exclusive, so just pick the one that you can afford in this.
This is what we think it is, not what we think it should be.
What do you think it is? I think
So it's not ours, it's just general?
it's what you believe. What do you believe is the biggest driver? All right. Take 2 minutes, turn to the person next to you in your living room, and tell them why you picked that number. What was your rationale?
And then they choose. I think it's for the faculty, maybe technology. It's going to be influential. Yes, I know, but for the students, yes, they do. They are typing machine. The way that he was, that's great. Well, not even know what that is. Yeah, so technology is not even thinking. Did you start machine? Some people never saw it. Like my great friend, high tech, my son calls. But another thing,
All right, here you go, the last one. My greatest concern about making changes in my course. Losing what works, accreditation or certification requirements, managing student resistance to change or their morale, and last, limited resources. That can be time, that can be financial resources, space resources.
That's a good choice.
That's a big split. All right, so a couple losing what works, managing resources. I actually want to hear from the managing student resistance. I want to hear from limited resources. What do you feel is a resource that you wish you had more of?
Teaching tech support, technical support.
Technical support, okay. And then managing student resistance morale. What's something you've seen that concerns you about sort of student resistance or student morale issues?
One of the contrasts that I see is what students like and what they need based on research and educational evidence. And that can really bounce into your evaluations, is that I did not like this. Is something that we listen to a lot rather than I needed this. And certainly when you're using different types of innovative pedagogies, they may not appreciate that. And I think that's something they have to work hard at managing.
Yes, you have to, well, first is managing expectations for that. The second is just recognizing that there are times that sometimes the teacher knows best. And making sure you're on that firm ground with your students, because it happens. You know, what is sometimes good for us isn't always our favorite thing to do in the moment. So, all right, and losing what works. Give me one example of something that makes you nervous, that you would lose.
Individual connection.
Yeah, so if you get to a situation where you feel that using maybe a technology in the classroom, or students are going to lose the interaction, the communication, relationship building. So that could be one thing you might lose. You don't have to, but it's always a trick balancing that. All right, so those are our 4 questions. I learned a lot about you. I appreciate it. So come on, have a seat. So as we talk about student feedback, and especially course evaluations, even evaluations on individual activities, the one thing I want to really point out is we often always get our feedback about our teaching, and we almost always have our teacher hat on. And we don't actually realize that the students don't look at the questions the same way we do. They really don't. They don't have teaching expertise, and they don't, when they look at that question, they put an answer, they're not often thinking the same things we're thinking about that question. So we're going to talk about this in 2 different perspectives. So, some people stand on an island and say, boat! The person on the boat says, land! And that's just what our students do too. We think, this is great, this is good for you, you're gonna be active, I'm gonna be engaging you, I'm gonna really bend their minds and challenge them. And they go, ugh, you're bending my mind, you're challenging me, stop. Can't it be easy one day? So you're doing the same things, they're actually good for them, good for their learning, but you're gonna have 2 different perspectives that push back and forth against each other. So just keep in mind we're gonna flip perspectives as we talk about questions. All right, so first of all, I want you to know this is how I feel when I open my email and I know I have an evaluation report sitting in it. It doesn't mean I don't want the evaluation, but I know that I'm going to overanalyze and overstress, and I have to think, do I really want to open it right now? Okay, I never open it in the morning. So what I thought I would do is let you know that these are comments. I gave a presentation to a national group in Chicago on, this is actually a tool for reflective learning. So you don't need to know the content, but these are the comments. 85 faculty, the toughest learners, by the way. 85 faculty, I got 16 comments. Sound familiar? Yeah, you don't get comments from everybody. And I want you to read them. This is all of them. And what I want you to know, what we all notice, is sometimes our comments give us conflicting information. But I also want you to think about which one I spent the most time thinking about. Pick out the comment that you think I just persevered. Let me get out of my head. think about it. But let me just tell you, it wasn't a boilerplate presentation. I customized that presentation. I thought about it. I changed it right before. And I thought, are you kidding me? You really took the time to write that, you know, and if you were that grumpy, you should have just gotten up and left, go somewhere else. But of course, these are those things that stick with you. And the reason I share this is there's actually really helpful information in here. And there's one in particular that I am definitely going to modify the presentation based on this feedback. And one is that the person would like less time on theory, more time on practice. That's an excellent piece of feedback. And I'm going to take it, I'm going to use it. And I'm going to just have to get over the fact that a person thought I do this presentation all the time. Which I don't. But boy, that was pretty vitriolic, right? I mean, really? You don't have anything better to do than to write a whole paragraph. But we all get these. And so the reason I'm sharing these with you is I want you to think about the fact that you never use one comment or all your comments or even the numbers from Courseval's as in separate pots. Instead, you want to take your Courseval's and also think about your student achievement data, as well as just some of the things you see in class, student engagement, how students are answering, are they learning from one another, and then you put all that together and say, well, do I want to make changes? We have a faculty member we work with very regularly in the sciences at Virginia Tech, and he came to me and he said, oh my goodness, my Courseval's went down. And he does this really huge classes, does pretty engaging projects, science projects, tries to get students to take on the role of scientists. However, every other metric went up. His test scores went up by 25%, student pass rates went up, and I said, you know, at some point, so they didn't like it. They really, and then he gives them an alternate course evaluation about what they learned, and those went up. And I said, well, you just have to decide. So I want you to understand that you always take course evals in a context of all of the other things. But there's always, comments are nice. They actually can give you some really helpful feedback, but you have to use your professional judgment as to which of those are the most accurate representation of student feedback. So you see, we all get bad ones. You're not in alone, but sometimes you don't want to open that report right away. Yeah.
It's like a question / comment. So
Yeah.
I get like a final reflection as an assignment, which is really not that different from what is asked on the course eval. And so I'm getting a lot more data because they have to do that one and they don't have to do the course eval. But I get so much, like they literally could copy the reflection answers and put it into the course eval, but they don't. They give me such a different information and usually much more positive than the reflection. And much more kind of, they've really sat and thought about things. And in the course eval, it's like their whole mindset is completely different when they're doing that particular activity. And so the question is kind of, have you ever noticed that before? Have you had?
Well, I will tell you that often on course eval, students aren't going to take the time to think deeply. We know that. They do it quickly. I always say with course evals, you should look at the trends, not single instances. So, and you want to look at you want to look at your questions relative to each other. Meaning that if all your students were pretty grumpy and they filled it out in 2 minutes on a Sunday night, you might have everything skew low. But if you have let's say 4 that are all about the same number, and then you have one that's a little lower, you just look relative to each other. So you look at that one and say, well, what? Okay, yeah, they're generally grumpy when they answer this, but for some reason they all felt a little less strong about, I don't know, organization. What does that mean? And then you can dig back into your reflections and say, did they say anything about organization? I could really see if there's something there. So when you're doing that, you always want to look at your data relative to each of the questions, but also trends over time. Because we all know that also chemistry of a class, the students together, can really affect the learning environment as well. And so sometimes you just have generally a group that's going to rate you lower, and you will have groups that rate you higher, and you've done the exact same thing with both groups. So you want to look at those numbers of the same cohort, each item's relative to one another. So that would be my recommendation. Recognize that you're not going to get the depth of information. Yes?
I can tell tell you're an assessment person because you're talking about data and how to present it. And this is one of my real pet peeves in medical student education is we are very, very reactive to the latest set of numbers, and we don't look at the trends. And in our case, sometimes we don't even look at the data over the course of 1 year. We chop it up into say, how did this group think? In some cases, the groups are extremely small. And you can't rush out and make a bunch of changes based on what that group of 5 or 6 students thought. But we do that sometimes. And I think it hurts us because even then, if you're always doing that, then if you follow trends, it's hard to make sense out of it because you've done so many changes in between that the numbers don't, you're really not measuring the same thing.
Well, and that's a really good point, because none of us would do that in our research.
Right.
We would never say, wow, we didn't get the result we expected, let's change every variable. And then we get to the end of that and say, well, it all went up. Great, what mattered? I don't know, but I didn't sleep for like 3 months, so that wasn't worth it. So it's also we always try to also, if you are going to make changes, please make changes just because, it makes life more exciting. But change a few things at a time in a very manageable way, because number one, you know what, then at least you can kind of figure out what made a difference. And again, people are messy. It's not nearly as measured and controlled as scientific research. You're measuring humans' behavior, and sometimes it's just the time of class, kind of day you teach sometimes can affect that. All of those things can impact things. But so 1, follow trends. 2, you always want to look relative to each other. And 3, pick 1 or 2 things to change. First, you'll do it better because you won't be overwhelmed. But also then you can know if it worked. It's really hard to not know if it worked. And I always say, sometimes when you see data that's low and you might feel really defensive, number one, that's because you're actually probably good at a lot of things personally, and that's okay. And if you didn't take feedback and have a reaction, I would actually wonder why not. Because you're doing what you're doing, where you're doing it, you're probably pretty good at it. And so to get any feedback that feels negative, I would actually wonder why you're not having a negative reaction. That seems odd. Psychologically, you would hope that when people get feedback that even doesn't jive with what they want to hear, you should have that reaction. But it doesn't make it any more fun. It does happen. So those are some things to think about when you get the feedback, because you want to contextualize it. Well, I was going to say one more thing. I forgot what I was going to say. I'll think of it. All right, so these are your evaluations. So the other thing, it's going to sound as we go through with these student perspectives versus faculty perspectives, it's going to sound that I'm being negative about your evaluation tool. I actually want to tell you that compared to most evaluation tools, yours is actually pretty strong. Mainly because it really does ask about teaching method more than satisfaction, even though it doesn't always feel like that when you read your responses. So it's actually pretty strong. However, Danielle and I looked over it, and what we did notice is that it really does split into 2, and I think that's based on sort of the way your courses are labeled. But your questions are split into didactic lectures and student-centered class activities, and we had the immediate reaction, we hadn't read the questions yet. Lectures can be student-centered, and they can be engaging, and they can be all those things. So I want to start by saying there are people out sort of on the educational talk circuit that think lectures are evil. They're not. Lectures are a really great tool. You have to deliver content, you're giving students information. What we're going to talk a little bit about, and Danielle's going to talk about some strategies, is actually how to bring the more student-centeredness to the lecture. That lectures don't have to actually be didactic all the time. You can stop, students can talk to each other, they can really process lecture information in a way that's student-centered and learning-centered. But just know that this is actually with the labels, something to think about. Sometimes the way we label things, it doesn't have to be student-centered or lecture. It can be both together. All right, so your lecture evaluation has 4 main pieces. One is they just say, how effective were the lectures? Okay, and then organized. Organization of lectures is always fascinating to me because you do have students that want you to give them the whole, they think getting slides with everything that's on a test is organized. And we know that from a learning perspective, you're actually not helping them learn by giving them everything they ever need to know on a test in a slide. You instead want to show that you have an organization structure, but they're supposed to learn on their own. They have to take notes. They might not like it, but they have to. And you actually just come right out and tell them at the beginning of the class. You're going to notice my slides don't have any words on them. That's because you're supposed to use them as an organizational tool and put your own words on them because you won't learn. And it's okay. They're not going to like it at first, but eventually they'll get the hang of it. But so organization's an interesting one because I bet you are very organized and your content is very organized. But when it's all new to them, they don't know that. It just all feels new. And so those are the perspectives. If you had another faculty member look at your lectures, they would say, wow, that was organized. But a student who is at a novice stage and maybe didn't do their reading is going to say, oh, that was so disorganized, I didn't understand a thing. So just to keep in mind, how can you make organization so obvious that the students can't miss it? And Danielle's going to give you a couple strategies for that, where you just kind of smack them over the head with organization. It gives them an organized scheme in their head where they can start tacking information together. Also, did you answer your questions? And did you take time to explain? Now I'm going to give you what we think, of course, as teachers is, did I give them time to ask questions? And did I explain that well? We're thinking, are they learning from the questions and from the explanation? Well, at Virginia Tech, we run the Thank a Teacher letter program. I don't know if you know this program, but we've run it for like 6 years. So we get over 1,000 letters a year. Now, this is self-selected bias, but what we did is we wanted to analyze the letters to see if it actually told us anything about teaching. What are students grateful for? Now, we throw out all the ones that say, you're a rock star. We like your tattoos. We get those. And then we try to keep ones of substance, and we just wanted to see if there were themes or trends. And I will tell you what's really interesting is from our point of view, we see pedagogy in there. You took time to ask many questions. I failed my first test and felt like a failure, and on the bottom you wrote, come see me. And told me what I needed to do to study better. These are all excellent pedagogical tools, right? They list them out. But the students don't talk about teaching. They don't think they're talking about teaching. They say these words. Thank you for caring enough about me to write that on the bottom of my test. Thank you for caring enough to not let me sit in the back and pretend like I knew what I was doing. Thank you for, do you hear? They don't think this is teaching at all. They think asking questions and taking time to explain is you caring about them. They interpret that as how they are made to feel, which is a very fascinating thing, right? And again, coming back to your point, this is what students take time to write, but somehow sometimes don't get conveyed in the evaluation. So the reason I bring it up is for us, it's really pointed out the difference between faculty perceptions of what teaching is and students' perceptions of what teaching is. They're both good teaching, but students perceive good teaching as care. Faculty perceive good teaching as you learned something. I prepared you when you did that. So I point that out because it's a very different response. Students have a very emotional response to good teaching. And sometimes not. And sometimes that emotional response is triggered by completely other things in their life. The other thing they talk about, needs or care all the time, and we have to decipher what they're talking about, is if you care about your discipline in a way that demonstrates to them how somebody should behave in a discipline. That you're passionate about the discipline, that you're rigorous in the discipline, and you're essentially a role model. You represent the discipline. They think that you really care about the content. So that's really an interpretation of your passion for what you teach, as that you care. And they like that. They thank their teachers all the time about this. Now this runs across graduate students, undergraduate students, international students, but we see those same patterns. If you take time to organize and you take time to explain to students, the reason I'm not writing everything on a slide is I care that you learn it. If you actually flip your language a little, somehow the students are like, oh, well, this person cares. Well, yeah, if I didn't stay up all night doing this because for my own sake, you know. So we share that because those are the differences between our perspectives of what we do and how students receive what we do.
I'm curious about that a little bit, because at Tech you've got smaller classes, 20, 30 people, and then you've got these huge classes. And how does that correlate with being able to care for your students?
That's a really great question. Now, what we're starting to see, and we haven't dug into all the data yet, but what we're starting to see is students understand and set different expectations based on the size. They don't have unrealistic expectations. If they walk into classes that 350 people in it, they're knowing that they're not going to have the same relationship they have with the faculty in the class that's 12. So that's okay. They usually give faculty a pass on that. They're not hard about it, but I will tell you they do these things. I just wanted to let you know I was the girl who sat in back and never said anything. It didn't mean that I didn't care or that I didn't like your class. I actually learned a lot, but I just didn't want you to take it personally because I'm really shy. Like they actually say things like this. The other thing that we see a lot of is I know this was a class of 300 people. You never got to know my name, but the fact that you actually tried to use students' first names meant a lot to me. So a lot of times in large classes, it's actually not the student with the professor relationship. It's just a perceived intention to care about your students, even if they're just observing it.
There was just a Chronicle article last month that illustrated that front person on those 300 level classes actually influences whether the students will go forward or not, because they are the face of that discipline. And so if they have a really crappy 100 level experience, they're less likely to move forward.
Yeah, to take the second class is actually one of the biggest indicators of quality teaching, is if they enroll in another. It means that you did enough to express interest and passion for a discipline that carries through. But that's absolutely right. It's the whole movement to make sure you put your best teachers with the brand new students, which is almost like sometimes it's a lot of work. So it's like punishing the faculty, right? Who are good at what they do. But it is true. If you're ever in a program or you're ever a program director and you want to grow it, you stick your best faculty member with the incoming students and you will see your population go up exponentially. Because the students talk to each other and they talk about how great this was, and the students think it's the discipline. Oh, I loved it, I learned this, I thought it was so cool, blah, 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 you should take this. But if you switch the faculty members sometimes, they're not going to have the same response. So it's really important, but it's a perception of care on their part. But they do understand that it's relative to their expectation. I mean, happiness is the alignment of your expectation with your reality. Students know when they walk in on a huge lecture that it's not the same experience as a 12th person. But just the fact that you try, and then you don't just say, all right, I'll give you an example. So the way a lot of our large lectures take attendance is with clickers. So we have one faculty member who will name this, who says, you know, I got tired of policing the clickers. So I know students come in with a whole bag of 12 clickers and just click in for their friends. I said, what? Well, it's cheating. They get points for that. No, you have to say something. You say, yeah, you know, if they want. And I just kind of said, well, if you don't care, why do you do it? Like, just, you know. But then we have other faculty who actually really care. They will say, I will let you click in at random times. The reason I take attendance is this. It's very important that you're here. The most important thing to affect attendance is to actually show student achievement for those that come versus those that don't from the previous semester. Now, you always then have to ask yourselves, are they able to achieve this in things that not come? But normally teaching is a pretty social interaction. So if students are achieving achieving more and they come to class, show the students that data. Because they will do that. And if you actually want them to stay both the time and really be engaged, how do you make sure that you're checking in, that attendance isn't just physically sitting in the seat? But they're actively engaged in what you're talking about, they're actively engaged with each other, because does it really matter that they're sitting there if they're not learning something? So how do you check in with them? Those sorts of things. So just something to share that yes, the student perception of teaching is often an emotional one. Fair or not, it is what it is. All right, so Danielle's going to talk a little bit about some techniques for organization. One thing to think about is, again, the perception of what's on the left is the way students might perceive your organization, while on the right is the way another faculty member might perceive it. It has nothing to do sometimes with the fact that it isn't organized. It's that sometimes students are very overwhelmed by all the new content, that it seems unorganized to them. So you have to make your organization scheme really obvious to the students. So, all right, Danielle is gonna take it away.
All right, so as Kim pointed out, really making the organization obvious. So there's a lot of things that are competing for our students' attention, right? You know, what they're doing later that day, what their friends are doing, what's going to happen in the next episode of whatever show it is that they're addicted to. There's a lot of those these days. So what you really want to do is, because you know the organization, you know you've spent time organizing your lecture around key concepts and what you need to, but it's not as clear to the students. So again, it's making it obvious. And one of the easiest ways to do that is outlining or providing an overview of what's going to happen in that lecture. So what are your 4 key points for the lecture? Can you show those on the slide, provide them on the handout, what have you, and then throughout the lecture, just keep referring back to them as you cover each key point. So you can end and say, okay, we've just addressed the first point, now we're going to transition into the second point. And I know it may sound really simple to say that, but it makes a difference because there's that cue that, oh, okay, we're moving to the next part that's related. And even just bringing the outline back up again and showing the second point can reiterate the organizational concepts that you've prepared the lecture around. So, finding those natural segments and then just making it very clear that you're transitioning to the next point. And also finding linkages between the material. Not just the points for that lecture, but also points for previous lectures or other content from other classes can be important. Because as learners, we're not always very good at transferring content, right? We tend to stay very siloed. Well, we learned this in this class in this block. So it's going to stay in this class in this block. I'm not going to bring it with me, next year. So sometimes we have to point out those obvious, what is to us, obvious associations between material, but it's not so obvious to our students. So think of how you can do that within a lecture, between your key points, but also within the courses that they're taking. The next point, summary. Anytime you take a public speaking class, you're told you need 3 things, right? That you need an introduction that's going to outline what you're going to do or what you're going to talk about. Then you're going to talk about what you're going to talk about, and then you need to summarize what you just talked about. So same thing for a lecture. Finding just a few moments at the end to recap and summarize the main points are going to help reiterate the organization of your lecture. I know sometimes it's easier said than done because sometimes we're pushed up to the end, right? It's like, oh, I've got a minute and 20 seconds left before I have to let you go. So sometimes we're a little rushed, so just trying to keep that in mind, that you might need to cut out some things and just summarize where you're at to reiterate the concepts. And then finally, incorporating formative assessments. And there's a whole host of different activities you could do for formative assessments. But to talk about a few, one might be asking students to jot down what they think the key concepts were from the day's lecture. And this does a few things. One, it gets them focused on figuring out, of course, what the key points are. It allows you an opportunity to review prior to the next time you see them, if they were on track and what maybe they're off about, so you can address those misconceptions the next time you see them. But it also kind of trains them to get used to you as an instructor. And you can think about times when you were a student, each time you had a different faculty member, you had to learn that faculty member's style, that faculty member's personality, how he or she approached lecture, what he or she cared most about. So your students are also figuring you out, and it's going to take, a week or two before they fill you out and get used to you. So that activity also helps them get used to your lecture style and how you approach and organize your lecture. So that's one type of formative assessment you can do. The other thing that comes up a lot when students make comments about the organization of a lecture, it's because there's an overwhelming amount of content and they're not sure how to manage that. So here are a few kind of strategies, general guidelines to keep in mind. One is what I call the 1 to 15 rule, which is one main point for every 15 minutes of class. So if you've got 75 minutes of class, try not to exceed 5 key ideas. And that doesn't mean you can't address the subpoints under those, but there's 5 key ideas that you're really focusing in on to give you time to really explain that concept, provide examples, and hopefully build in some sort of quick processing activity to get students thinking about that key idea. Also, based on what we know about how we learn, we know learning's associative. So tapping into what learners already know about a topic can help them add on to that knowledge. Of course, you always have to be careful with misconceptions they might have about the topic, but doing some sort of activity to get them thinking about what they already know, let's say about motility disorders. We were talking about different motility disorders. Sorry, maybe that's not a good idea for lunch right now. Ask them what they already know. They can share that, and then so as you cover that material, they can connect back to what they already know. That's the same idea with using analogies. So analogies are a way of simplifying complex content in a way that's going to help learners latch on to something that makes sense to them, but then they're able to add information onto it. So going back to motility disorders, if you're talking about peristalsis, for example, you might use the analogy of a ketchup packet and kind of cutting off the end of a ketchup packet and then squeezing it through. So there's that wave-like motion as you push the ketchup through to the end. So most people are going to be familiar with the ketchup packet. They're going to latch onto that analogy, and it's going to help them build onto their knowledge base as you explain more about that disease. Now, this next concept, the test and effect and retrieval activities, may not be a fan favorite of students, but what we know is that the more students are tested on material, the more likely they are to retain it. And by that, I don't mean you have to give them quizzes and tests all the time. Really what we're getting at here is that you're asking them to retrieve information. Because the more learners retrieve information from memory, the more you're strengthening that retrieval cue. And also the more you have them work with the material, either quiz or test or some sort of processing activity, you're forcing them to spend time with the content, right? Either studying or answering questions about it. And of course, that's beneficial to their learning, right? So there's multiple effects there. But it also shows how much you value that they learn and spend time with the material. And then finally, productive failure. And this is a little bit hard for medical students in particular because they don't like to fail. A lot of them are failure avoidant, avoiding risk at all costs. Like, I don't know I'm too good at that. I don't want to look stupid in front of my colleagues or my peers. But we need to find ways where it's safe for them to fail, where it's low stakes. Because it's better they fail now than when they're with patients, right? So how can you work that in? How can you create an environment where it's safe for them to fail and realize, you know what, I don't really know this content as well as I should. Maybe I need to spend a bit more time studying it, working with it, delving into the research so that I can grasp it a little bit better. And of course, going back to asking questions and having them ask you questions, you all have probably experienced when, you know, you're lecturing and you pause and you ask, all right, are there any questions? And it's like blank stares through the room and no one wants to make eye contact with you. No. Again, it goes back to that idea of, you know, students are often afraid of looking stupid in front of their peers. So how can we find ways to let them ask anonymous questions so that they can have that opportunity, but also avoid that that fear of, you know, social anxiety they have about asking in front of others. So simple things like passing out index cards and having them jot down anonymous questions that you can take up and randomly pull out and ask during class or address the next class period. Setting up a Google Doc where they can submit their questions during class and you could pull that up and review them during class or address them the next class period. You know, there's always workarounds there. The other idea you can think about, because we're often going at such a fast pace in lecture, is just pausing every 10 to 15 minutes to give them that break to catch up on notes, but also review the notes that they've been taking about what you've covered so far. So building in that time for reflection and to think about, okay, let me look at this concept again. Let me see if I think I've got it and if there are any questions I want to ask. You can even have them pair up with a peer to review notes so they can check if one student missed something, they could get that from the other student. If they both have a question, they could ask it to each other and then maybe ask you for clarification. It's just helping to establish that culture or in learning environment that it's okay to ask questions. I really want you to take the time to pause and reflect on if you're getting this or not. And then finally, another quick formative assessment is called a Muddiest Point. And this is at the end of a class period. You can ask students to anonymously submit to you what they're still the most unclear about from that day's lecture. So again, if half the class isn't getting a key concept, then you know what, I probably should address this in a different way or find some extra resources to help them understand this key concept. And the next point we're going to talk about from the evaluation were the ones focused on the student-centered class activities.
Yes, and I'm actually just going to focus on a couple because we are running a little short on time. So the one I'm going to talk about is some of those things about are students the best judge of this, and again, should take things in context. So for example, the content was important. Well, yeah, sometimes students may not be the best judge about whether content is important, but sometimes that's actually a reflection. If all the students are saying it's not important, you don't sit back and say, I'm going to change the content. Instead, you say, I don't think this is important. This is really important. So it's really how you take the feedback, not I'm going to change everything. You don't leap to the change. You leap through the processing of it. And then the other thing we're going to talk that I'm going to skip the third one. We spent a lot of time on the others, but I will tell you that more than when we have this talk sometimes in other avenues or venues, when I asked the faculty in the other sessions what were effective modalities, here's what I heard, so I'll just share it. In modality is the idea that whatever you want to teach, you pick the appropriate tool. I will tell you, that's not normally the answer we get in every venue, but I was happy to hear that. But I will tell you that I'm not so sure students know what that is. That I would really be interested to read comments on that. I don't know if students know what modalities are in teaching, just because that's sort of a teaching word. So I bring that up. And then the last one, amplified my understanding. So these are those class activities. Amplified my understanding and my ability to synthesize. Now students are usually pretty good judges about whether something helped them understand. They're sometimes not so great at knowing whether something helped them synthesize. The synthesizing things you have to pull from all over, and you're supposed to sort of make something new, make a brand. And students aren't so great at actually judging their ability to synthesize. But they are usually pretty good at judging whether they know something or not. Not usually right away, but by the end of a course, they can talk about that. So I just wanted to share those questions. So Danielle has a few strategies for these.
So running short on time. I'm going to just pick a few what I think are maybe most applicable. But as you all know, participation and engagement is always an issue when you're doing activities, right? Sometimes the struggle is real with that one. So one thing that I think might be the most helpful out of this is multiple hands, multiple voices. Because a lot of times, let's say we might ask a question, and it's the same one or two students who raise their hands, if we're lucky enough to get a hand raised at all, right? So instead of asking for it, can someone say, all right, I'd like to hear from 3 people. What do you think about this? And you've established that expectation for 3 people. When you ask the next question, okay, 3 different people, tell me this. So you're establishing this expectation that everyone participates and that you want to hear from multiple people. I'm going to skip ahead. The importance aspect, I think, again, not only should you communicate why you're doing these activities and why they're important, but sometimes it can be helpful to flip around and ask the students why they think you're doing or they're engaging in this activity. So ask them, okay, so this is what we're doing today. Why do you think it's important? Why are we covering this? And see what they have to say. If they don't understand why they're doing it, then there's that opportunity to explain why it's important and how it's going to connect to their practice or exam prep or whatever it may be. And then synthesis, just because that is such an important issue and really what we want to get at, especially in medical education. Getting students to find ways to represent information in multiple forms. So it's not just that they hear the information, but they can hear it, they can write it down, they can act it out. The more ways that they can express the information, the more likely they are to retain it and learn it and keep it and be able to apply it in different contexts. But also finding ways that we can probe them more deeply about their understanding, so asking those probing questions and getting them to conceptualize associations. So how can they see where materials related to each other? Activities like making concept maps where they can visualize how this concept connects to this one and what's related. Comparison contrast charts, things like that can be helpful. And then one last thing, because obviously patient assessment skills are kind of the grand synthesis of, of everything in medical education. One particular method that's been studied and it seems to be pretty effective is the SNAPS method, which you have the resident or the student summarize, the case history, the physical findings, narrowing the differential, and analyzing the differential, and they're explaining this to you before you provide any insight. And then they get the opportunity to probe you and ask questions about what they're uncertain about. And then from there, they can plan patient management and then select something that they still need to learn more about to advance their own understanding. So there's a resource there if you're interested in learning more about that particular method. I would check out that source. I know we're 1 minute to spare. And this is where we get to that point of 1 minute and you have the summary to give. Do you want to?
Yeah, so we do just, I know we're at the end and some people have to go, but I also want you to know that we're going to stay. So if you have questions or you want to talk beyond that. But overall, I hope what you can take with you is number one, we didn't go into every detail about every pedagogy. But the idea that you can use student feedback, but you use student feedback in the context of your other information. But really the point of student feedback is just to self-reflect. Did I see these same things? Why did students write this? Or is it the one person I'm going to ignore because, they don't think I made a good original presentation in Chicago? So I share that with you to say that evaluations aren't perfect. They're not, and we accept that. You do your best to use that information in a way that's contextualized, but also connected to what we know about teaching. So, thank you. Nice and exciting. Thank you all for coming.
please stick around if you want to talk with Kim or Danielle.
Or just want to ask questions, we can have some time for questions. But I know some of you have to go.
Have a great day.